I stood still before the lavish table and realized there wasn't a single chair for me. "Go eat outside like a beggar," my son growled, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. My daughter-in-law laughed, her glass of red wine trembling. I subtly signaled a server, leaned in, and whispered a few words that made him freeze. Then I lifted my head, smiled calmly, and said, "Fine if someone has to leave. It won't be me." Everything stopped for a beat. The clink of silverware, the low laughter from nearby tables, even the soft jazz on the piano all cut out like someone pulled the plug. I felt dozens of eyes land on me. A few guests leaned halfway out of their chairs, openly curious. The server beside me stood tense, his eyes flicking between me and my son as if waiting for a command. My heart pounded, but my face kept the same thin, steady smile, cool to the point of cold. I'm used to hiding a shaking heart behind a quiet exterior. I've had to learn that to survive my whole life. Lucas, my only son, slouched back in his chair, arms folded. The light from the crystal chandelier above washed over a face flushed with pride and anger. Next to him, Paige, my daughter-in-law, leaned back carelessly, pale red lips curved in a mocking grin. I looked at the long table draped in crisp white linen, the gleaming silverware, the crystal glasses filled with fine wine. There were 3 chairs, 2 were taken, and I, the mother of Lucas, had no seat. That single missing chair, that deliberate absence, was the deepest stab. It said more than anything Lucas had just thrown at me. What did you just say?" I asked, steady but hoarse. I tried to stop the tremor in my wrist. Lucas smirked. "You heard me. There isn't a seat for you here. This isn't your place. If you want dinner, there are plenty of diners outside. You fit in better with them." Paige tilted her head, voice syrupy to the point of shameless. "He's just being honest, Nora. Not. Everyone can afford this place or has the style to sit at this table." I took a slow breath. My chest burned like it was on fire. But I still signaled to the young server who'd been hovering since I walked in. I leaned close and whispered a few words. I saw his lips twitch, eyes go wide, then he nodded hard and slipped through the door to the kitchen. I knew the audience, the guests watching, were waiting to see what I'd do. I could feel the expectation thicken in the room. Lucas sneered, clearly thinking I'd ask the server to fetch me a chair, a gesture he'd call pitiful and embarrassing. But he didn't know. He had never known that the power play tonight wasn't in his hands. I set my small leather clutch on the edge of the table, letting it land with a deliberate click. Then I smiled, tilted my head, and said the line that surprised even me with how calm I sounded. "Fine if someone has to leave. It won't be me." Paige laughed out loud so sharp that an older couple at the next table turned fully to stare. Lucas scowled, voice harsh. "What are you even saying? Who invited you here? Who's paying for this dinner?" "Me." "So what right do you think you have to say that?" I raised an eyebrow and didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up the glass of water the server had just set down, took a small sip, and tried to keep my hand from shaking. Setting the glass back, I looked straight into Lucas's eyes, the same eyes I used to kiss on his forehead when he fell asleep in my arms as a child. Now they were only cold, disdainful, even unfamiliar. "Why did you invite me here today?" I asked, even and calm. Lucas barked a short laugh, edged with a bitterness I'd never heard from him before. "To make you understand. To make you see the difference." I climbed up. "I live in a world of success, of class, and you—" He glanced down at the old emerald blue dress I'd chosen for tonight. "You're still just an ordinary old woman in a cramped apartment buying end-of-season bargains. I don't want anyone thinking that's where I come from." Somewhere farther off, I heard a guest drop their silverware onto a plate. The whole room stayed tight as a drawn wire. I drew a long breath and kept my voice level. "So, what do you want from me tonight? A performance? Lucas waved a hand. Call it a wake-up call. To remind you of your place. Paige added softly, but loud enough to hear. Nora, you should be grateful Lucas even let you step in here. Someone else wouldn't have invited you at all. My throat tightened, but in that same instant, a quiet flame rose in me. I scanned the room, tables glowing with candlelight, curious faces, eyes glinting with expectation. I knew every word I was about to say, every move I was about to make, wouldn't just answer Lucas and Paige. It would be my statement to this entire room. But I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch so Lucas would think I was crumbling. I let him believe he'd won again. Meanwhile, my heart hammered, because in just a few minutes, the truth I'd kept for so long would change everything. The young server returned, cautious-eyed. He set a small envelope on the edge of the table, bowed slightly to me, then slipped away. I laid my hand on the envelope and slid it toward me like it was just a check. Lucas frowned but didn't ask. Paige lifted her brows, nosy. I brushed the envelope's edge, then looked up and smiled at Lucas. It wasn't the patient smile of a mother being looked down on anymore. It was the smile of someone holding a secret neither of them had guessed. My fingers smoothed the envelope, the smile still on my lips, while a rush of memories crashed over me. This envelope didn't just hold numbers or cold paperwork. It carried all the years I'd swallowed tears drop by drop to raise the boy sitting there, who now looked down on the woman who gave him life. When I was young, I never thought life would veer this way. I met my husband at 19, married early, and believed we would live simply forever. But fate isn't gentle. He died suddenly in a car accident when I was 40, leaving me with a teenage son and piles of debt from the little shop we'd tried to run. The day I buried him, I almost gave up. But when I looked at Lucas's still young face, I knew I had no right to collapse. I had to keep going, not just for me, but for him. So I began the long grind. Mornings I worked the front desk at a small law office, nothing glamorous, answering phones, sorting files, bringing coffee. Evenings, I cleaned offices for an accounting firm. The cold neon lights, gray concrete floors, and the squeal of the copier became my soundtrack for years. On weekends, I washed dishes at a little family-run Italian place in the neighborhood, my hands always cracked from dish soap. There were nights I slept only 3 hours. When the alarm rang at 5 a.m., I'd sit up, aching head to toe, and tell myself, "Get up, Nora, don't stop." At first I thought I was just working to survive. But then I started paying attention. At the Italian place, I watched how the head chef barked orders, how servers smiled at guests even when exhausted, how the owner kept the books. I memorized every detail like a student cramming, quietly stuffing it all into my head. That's when I realized every small role in a restaurant is a vital link, and if I understood them all, I could grasp the whole picture. While I was learning, Lucas was still a boy who needed dinners and textbooks. Some days he came home upset because he couldn't afford a field trip with his class. My heart broke, but I gritted my teeth. I chose to sell my wedding ring, the only keepsake of my husband, to pay Lucas's first year of college tuition. That night I cried silently in my room, but the next morning, when Lucas saw the paid receipt, he hugged me and whispered, "I promise I'll never make you." Ashamed of me. I believed him. But time changes everything. Lucas got into a prestigious university. I cried right there at orientation. I was so proud. He slipped easily into a new world with friends from wealthy families. I noticed he grew embarrassed when his friends learned I did manual work. When I dropped off homemade food at his dorm, he'd lower his voice. "Mom, don't talk much about your job, okay? My friends don't need to know." I just smiled and nodded, but inside it felt like someone squeezed my chest. After graduation, Lucas landed a job at a big corporation. I was thrilled for him, telling myself all the sacrifice had paid off. But the distance grew. The calls slowed. Family dinners faded. I became a faint shadow in the dazzling life he was building. Even then, I kept working at that little restaurant, but not just at the sink. I asked to move to serving, then to the kitchen. I learned to manage invoices, to negotiate with suppliers. Once, I spotted a wire short that almost caused a fire and handled it in time. The owner trusted me more after that. I never stopped learning. I read management books, watched training videos, attended free workshops. Every extra dollar, I saved and invested small steps, one after another. And then one day, I could stand in the same kitchen where I'd once washed dishes, but this time as the person in charge. By then, Lucas was rising fast on his own path. The boy who'd hugged me in our tiny apartment now lived in a big house in an upscale suburb. He drove an expensive car, wore tailored suits, and had a wife from a wealthy family. I hoped somewhere deep down he still remembered the nights we ate cup noodles when there were only a few dollars left in my wallet, but the look in his eyes today at the Golden Laurel held no trace of that memory. Only contempt, as if I'd never been anything but a burden. I rested my hand on the envelope again, feeling the smooth, cool paper under my fingers. Every character inside was the result of decades of labor, learning, and endurance. I didn't need to brag. I'd never needed to prove my worth to anyone. But tonight, I knew the secret I'd guarded for years would be the sharpest blade to cut through the rope of arrogance strangling my son. I drew a quiet breath and let out a sigh only I could hear. All the sweat, all the nights crying in the dark, all the moments I wanted to quit had gathered to bring me to this moment. Lucas thought he had humiliated me. But he had no idea I'd spent my whole life preparing for this moment, the moment I lifted my head, no longer just a patient mother, but a woman who had built her own place in this world. Lucas leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with satisfaction when he saw me stay quiet. Paige, beside him, took a sip of red wine, then bent to adjust her sparkling pearl necklace. Every move she made seemed designed to flaunt itself in front of me, the woman in a simple dress who looked out of place in the restaurant's splendor. I stayed still, my hand resting lightly on the envelope. The chill of the paper only made me more certain that all the endurance was not for nothing. But Lucas didn't know that in my silence I was watching every move, his arrogant gaze, his voice pitched a notch higher on purpose, and the smugness like shaming his own mother in public was a victory. "You know," Lucas said with a hint of mockery, "just this one bottle of wine is more than $700. That's about your entire month's salary." He laughed, short and dry, like a blade cutting into my chest. Paige placed her hand on her husband's arm, pretending to hold him back. "Honey, don't be too harsh. It's not her fault. She's just not used to this kind of place." I tilted my head at her. That syrupy voice sounded protective, but every word carried a cruel sting. I didn't answer, just smiled, and that smile must have bothered Paige, because I saw the corner of her mouth freeze for a second. Lucas pressed on, as if to make sure I had no way out. "Mom, do you really think you belong here? Look around. These are successful, high-class people. You being here just makes us more embarrassed." Whispers rippled from table to table. I could clearly feel dozens of eyes tracking us. A few guests looked at me with sympathy, but more were eager, waiting like they were watching a drama headed for a payoff. I took a deep breath. The pain surged up in my chest, but I clamped it down. This wasn't the time to collapse. "Lucas," I said slowly, each word dropping like a hammer, "do you really think money is the only measure of a person's worth?" He gave a derisive laugh. "No, Mom, but it's the most important one. In this world, you either have it or you don't, and clearly, you're in the second group." Paige laughed out loud this time, not even pretending. "Come on, Nora. Don't blame Lucas. He just wants you to face reality. Everyone knows you live on a tiny pension in a tiny apartment on the edge of the city. We're in different worlds, just accept it." I looked her straight in the face. "Different worlds? Maybe. But Paige, sometimes the biggest gap isn't money. It's how people treat each other. She hesitated, then turned away, pretending to fuss with her wine glass. Lucas, on the other hand, slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware clang. "Enough, Mom. This is my promotion celebration. I invited you to witness my success, not to listen to empty lectures. If you're uncomfortable, the door is right there." A chill ran down my spine. The child I once cradled, the one I stayed up all night with when he was sick, was now throwing me out of this place in front of everyone. I was quiet for a few seconds. Then I signaled to the server standing nearby. He hurried over and bowed politely. I leaned in and whispered a few words. Surprise flickered in his eyes, then he nodded seriously and walked quickly toward the host stand. Lucas eyed me, one brow raised. "What now? Calling a cab to make it easy?" I smiled steadily, not blinking. "No, son. I'm just making sure that tonight, the person who has to leave isn't me." The air in the dining room seemed to freeze. A few guests stopped talking altogether and turned fully toward us. I could feel the tension spreading from table to table. Paige gave a dry laugh. "Who are you trying to scare? This is the territory of people like us. And you," she let her eyes sweep over my simple dress. "You're just an outsider trying to squeeze in." I didn't answer. I simply laid my hand on the envelope and smoothed one straight line across it. My heart beat slow and firm, like each second was getting ready for a shift that couldn't be stopped. In the soft golden light, I saw more clearly than ever the distance between me and them, a distance not made of money but of the arrogance etched into my son's eyes. That distance was the chasm splitting a mother and child, a chasm I knew I would force Lucas to face tonight. I lifted my head, kept the smile, and let the silence stretch. Because I knew the next few seconds wouldn't belong to Lucas or Paige anymore, they would belong to me. The dining room stayed taut and quiet after the back and forth between me and Lucas. I sat straight, hands lightly on the envelope. The air was so thick it felt like it could be sliced. I looked around and caught strange looks, no longer just curiosity, but focused watching with a hint of respect. The young server nearby, hesitant a moment ago, now bowed deeply to me. He whispered, "Ma'am, if you need anything, just say the word." His tone wasn't the usual scripted politeness, it carried something different, a kind of deference. Lucas frowned. "What's wrong with him? Why is he being that respectful to you?" He stared at me, suspicious. Paige scoffed, brushing it off. "He probably just feels sorry for her." He saw us putting her on the spot. But I noticed a few other staff glance my way, then give small nods. They didn't say a word, but their eyes held a familiarity, like I wasn't some random walk-in from the street. I slowly took a sip of water, letting the silence settle on the table. Inside me rose a strange mix, half sting, half calm. I knew what I'd planted over the years was starting to bloom, even if Lucas and Paige had no idea. Suddenly, a middle-aged man in a light gray suit approached. Tall, steady, unhurried. It was Oscar, the longtime manager of the Golden Laurel. I recognized him right away, his face older than the last time we met, but the eyes the same. Composed, clear, and loyal. "Good evening, ma'am," Oscar said in a deep, respectful voice. "Is everything all right?" I smiled slightly and nodded. "It's fine, Oscar. Thank you." Lucas knit his brows, glancing between us. "Hold on. You know my mother?" Oscar paused, then answered briefly, "We've known each other for a long time." He didn't explain further, but it was enough to stir the room. Paige jumped in, her gaze cold. "Known her for a long time? Why would a restaurant manager know her?" Oscar didn't reply. He simply bowed to me and stepped back, leaving Lucas and Paige frozen with questions. I could see confusion rising in their eyes. Not just them, nearby guests had started whispering. A woman in a red dress murmured to her husband, "Look, the manager rarely comes out himself." And he just greeted that woman personally. The husband nodded, eyes narrowing at me. Lucas turned fully in his chair and stared. Mom, what are you hiding from us? Why are the staff treating you like that? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang, a mirror for the impatience in his eyes. I saw his hand tighten around his wine glass, his fingers shaking. Paige pressed her lips together, eyes locked on the envelope in front of me. I sighed lightly and said slowly, "Not everything can be seen with the naked eye, Lucas. Some things you only notice when you really pay attention." Paige snorted. "Sounds like cheap philosophy." "Cut it out, Nora. Don't pretend to be mysterious. We know you have nothing but an old apartment and a tiny pension. Don't think a few polite staff make you important." I lifted my face and met her eyes, calm. "If you think everything is just surface, then you've never understood me." That made Paige falter for a beat, then she turned away and took a quick sip of wine to hide her unease. Just then, a group of servers walked by with the main courses. I noticed the lead young and new set plates in front of Lucas and Paige briskly, but when he set mine down, he paused, bowed lower, and said softly, "Please enjoy your meal." "Ma'am." His voice trembled, like he was serving someone above the regular guests. The clink of cutlery continued around the room, but I could feel a different current spreading. Lucas and Paige felt it too. I saw the restlessness in their movements. Lucas kept shifting in his seat. Paige twisted her napkin tight in her hand. In that moment I felt both hurt and light. Hurt that my son and daughter-in-law had to sit in this confusion. Light because I knew the truth was unfolding on its own. I didn't have to rush it. Lucas suddenly slapped the table, impatient. "Mom, say it. What did you do? Why is everyone looking at you like that?" I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them and looked straight at him. "Be patient. Sometimes to learn the truth, you have to learn to wait." Paige shot to her feet, her chair screeching on the floor. "I don't need to wait. I want to know right now." "Nora, what game are you playing here?" The whole room paused for a beat. Some diners turned fully toward us, not just curious anymore, but watching like a play had hit its peak. I stayed seated, smiling calmly. If you're that eager, open your eyes and look. The truth often shows up in small things. You just have to pay attention, and you'll see. Paige froze, breathing fast. Lucas looked around, eyes glued to every staff member quietly watching, to every sideways glance from nearby tables. No one spoke up, but the difference in how they treated me was becoming undeniable proof. I felt my heart thudding in my chest, but my face stayed calm. I knew the battle tonight wasn't over. This was only the beginning, the recognizing looks, the small signs planting seeds of doubt in Lucas and Paige. I lifted my water glass, took another sip, and set it down softly. Under the glow of the crystal chandelier, I smiled a smile layered with meaning. No one but me knew that tonight. The curtain was slowly being lifted, but it wasn't time to reveal everything yet. The scrape of the chair Paige had shoved back rang out, harsh, then faded in the already heavy air. Everything seemed to pause for a single breath. I sat still, both hands on the table, letting the silence act like an invisible rope binding all eyes to me. A low voice rose from the entrance. "Sorry for the interruption, but I think I should be here." Everyone turned at once. Heiter, the restaurant's board chairman, was walking in. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his polished leather shoes reflecting the warm light. He moved with measured steps, commanding, as if this room had been built for him. Lucas nearly sprang from his chair, a rushed smile flashing. "Mr. Heitor, what an honor to have you at our table." But Heitor didn't look at him. His gaze cut through the crowd and stopped on me. He smiled and dipped his head slightly. "Hello, Mrs. Nora. It's a pleasure to see you again." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. I felt dozens of stunned eyes. Lucas went rigid, glancing back and forth between me and Hader like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Paige clenched her napkin until it wrinkled, her face clearly paling. I nodded to Hader, as calmly as if this were a routine meeting. "Hello. I didn't expect you to come in person." Hader gave a small shrug, voice warm but firm. "I heard there was a misunderstanding. To me, your presence is never a small matter." The room buzzed again. Some guests leaned so far forward they were practically out of their seats, eyes wide like they were watching a gripping movie scene. Lucas finally managed to speak, voice cracking. "Mom, you know him? Why did Mr. Hader call you Mrs. Nora?" Paige jumped in, rushing her words. "It must be a mistake. It can't be." Hader turned to them, his eyes stern. "There is no mistake. Without Mrs. Nora, the Golden Laurel wouldn't exist for you to be sitting in it today." The sound in the dining room dropped like a stone into water. I saw Lucas struggle to breathe. Paige froze solid. I slowly opened the envelope still in front of me. The rustle of the papers inside rang out, sharp as an alarm for a truth that could no longer be avoided. I slid them toward Lucas and said evenly, "If you need proof, take a look." His hands shook as he picked them up. Ownership certificates, contracts bearing my signature, official seals clear as day. Each sheet cut into the arrogant shell he'd worn for so long. "No, no way," he whispered, eyes locked on the black words on white paper. You bought this restaurant?" Hader nodded. "Not just this one. Mrs. Nora has quietly invested, sustained operations for years. We're fortunate to have her." Paige snatched a page, skimmed it, then gave a brittle laugh. This has to be fake. Some cheap setup." Hader cut in, voice hardening. "Ma'am, I personally signed that contract. If you doubt it, I'll confirm it in any court you choose." Color flooded Paige's face, anger and fear flashing in her eyes. She flung the papers back onto the table, voice pitching high. "No, this is unacceptable." I looked straight at her, my gaze sharp as a blade. "Paige, the truth doesn't need anyone's acceptance. It exists whether you want it to or not." Lucas collapsed into his chair, hands buried in his hair. "My God, all this time. You owned this place, and He choked on the words. I leaned toward him, low but firm. "Yes. And you stood in this room, in front of everyone, and told your mother she didn't deserve a chair. Do you understand what you just did, Lucas?" He shook all over, eyes reddening. Paige stammered. You hid this from us. You set this up to humiliate us." I sat straight and looked at both of them. "No, I never wanted to humiliate anyone. But I had to let the truth speak because you went too far. Tonight, you pulled your own masks off in front of everyone." The air tightened again, as if the whole room was waiting for the next line. Hader stepped aside, giving me space. Oscar, the manager, came forward, set a gentle hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Whatever you want to do next, we're with you." I nodded my thanks. Then I turned back to Lucas and Paige. "You thought I had nothing. You counted on my silence to belittle and insult me. But starting tonight, you'll face a different truth. I'm not just an old woman in a small apartment. I'm the one who built, preserved, and holds the right to decide far more than you imagined." Applause rose from a corner of the room. An older guest stood and lifted his glass toward me. "You've taught all of us a valuable lesson." The clapping spread, rolling like surf. I sat still, heavy-hearted yet light. At last, the secret I'd guarded for years was out. There was no room left for denial. Lucas dropped his face to the table, shoulders shaking. Paige edged her chair back, but her feet seemed glued to the floor, uncertain whether to run or sit. Both of them looked swallowed by the storm they themselves had stirred up. I lifted my head and drew a deep breath. Tonight, I didn't just reclaim respect for myself, I drew a new line. From here on, no one gets to treat me like a shadow on the edge of their lives. The applause hadn't fully died when I put my hand on a second envelope in my purse. Unlike the stack from before, this one was thicker, heavier. The pages inside would decide Lucas and Paige's future. I slid it out and set it on the table, slow and deliberate. The crisp rustle made Lucas look up, eyes bloodshot, and Paige snapped to attention like a cornered animal. "For years," I began, steady and cool, "I kept your name in my will, Lucas. Even when you forgot your debts, I held out hope that, in the end, you'd wake up. But after tonight, things have changed." A low stir swept the room. A few guests covered their mouths, others nodded, waiting. Lucas leaned forward, voice breaking. "Mom, what are you saying? I'm still your son." I met his eyes, calm, like I'd been ready for this moment a long time. "Yes, you're my son, but you're no longer the default heir." I opened the envelope and pulled out pages stamped with legal seals. The cold black print under the chandelier's light looked like marks cut into stone. I slid them toward Lucas. "This is a new interim will. All my assets are put on hold. You won't receive a single dollar until you prove you deserve it." Paige gave a dry laugh, trying to cover her panic. "She's bluffing. Papers on a table don't mean anything." Right then, a man in a black suit walked in with a briefcase. He came to the table and set down his card in front of Lucas and Paige. "Good evening, I'm David Morris, Mrs. Nora's attorney. All documents here are notarized. I can read the terms aloud if needed." The room swelled with chatter. I watched Lucas go pale, like the strength had been drained out of him. He stammered, "No, no way. You can't do this to me." I answered, voice dropping each word, hitting like a hammer. "Son, I can, and I will. Respect can't be bought with money. You already threw away the most valuable thing." David opened the briefcase, pulled out a copy of the will, and read clearly, "Addendum, the assets of Mrs. Nora, including all shares in the Golden Laurel and related entities, will be held in suspension indefinitely. The heir will only receive distribution upon meeting specific conditions set by Mrs. Nora. Otherwise, all assets will be transferred to a charitable foundation established by Mrs. Nora." A chorus of soft gasps rose from many tables. I looked around and saw faces showing both surprise and respect. Paige went pale, forcing out, "A charitable foundation? This is a power play. You're cornering us, aren't you?" I turned to her, even and sharp. "No, Paige. I want you and Lucas to understand. Every action has consequences. If you want to inherit, prove you know how to respect and live decently. If not, the money will serve people who deserve it more." Lucas shot to his feet, his chair crashing back, eyes wild. "You can't do this. I sacrificed my whole life to rise up, to have my status today. It was all for you." I looked straight at him, holding down the tremor in my chest. "No, Lucas. You rose for yourself, and you never thought of me. If it was truly for me, you wouldn't have humiliated me in this restaurant. You wouldn't have let your wife mock me. You wouldn't have treated me like a shameful shadow." The room erupted in applause again, louder this time, like a public verdict. Paige tried to hold steady, but her voice shook. "If you do this, Lucas's reputation will be ruined. The company will find out. His friends will know. Have you thought about the consequences?" I tilted my head, offering a faint smile. "The consequences aren't coming from me, Paige. They're coming from how you've treated me." David, the attorney, closed the folder and said firmly, "From this moment, the new will is in effect. If there's a dispute, we'll resolve it in court. But I doubt that will be necessary, because all the evidence is clear." Lucas collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I looked at my son, my heart sour but without regret. This wasn't just punishment, it was his last chance to see the path he was on. I turned to the room and spoke steadily. Everyone here today has witnessed everything. I don't need to hide anymore. I stayed silent for too long, and that silence only fed ingratitude. From now on, I won't let anyone, even my own blood, look down on me ever again. Applause exploded, roaring like a wave. I sat up straight and let the sound wash over me like solid armor. Lucas kept his head down. Paige stayed silent. I knew the board had flipped completely in this moment. I was no longer the passive one waiting for judgment. I had taken back the right to decide, and they would have to live with that truth. The clapping in the dining room slowly faded, leaving only expectant eyes. Lucas still had his face in his hands, and Paige sat frozen, her lips trembling as if replaying every word she'd just heard. I took a long breath, set my hand on the documents in front of me, and rose to my feet. "Lucas, Paige," I began, firm but not harsh, "I won't shut the door on you forever. But any door opens only if you prove you've truly changed. And to do that, I'm setting 6 conditions. These 6 conditions will determine whether you still have a chance." The air seemed to thicken. A few guests leaned forward like they were watching a serious hearing. Attorney David sat quietly, pen in hand, ready to record. Lucas lifted his head, face twisted with despair. "What conditions?" "I'll do anything." I looked at him for a long moment without blinking. "Don't promise yet. Listen first, then decide." I held up one finger. "First, the 2 of you will volunteer at a nursing home for 1 year, every weekend. Not just signing in to check a box, you will directly care for, talk with, and share time with the people who've been left behind. You need to understand the loneliness of old age, the same loneliness I've felt since you pushed me out of your lives." Paige flinched, ready to object, but my look made her bite her lip and keep quiet. I raised a second finger. "Second, you'll leave your luxury house and live in a modest apartment on a budget of $4,000 a month. That's not little, but it's just enough to remind you that living decently doesn't require showing off. I want you to relearn humility, the thing you lost." Lucas trembled, voice catching. "But Mom, the house." I cut in, voice sharp as a blade. "The house matters less than the lesson you need to learn." I lifted a third finger. "Third, Lucas, you will work at one of my restaurants. Not as a manager, not in operations, as a server. You will carry trays, greet guests with respect, and handle complaints. Only when you feel that will you understand where I started and respect the people you used to look down on." A hush of whispers spread through the room. Many people nodded. Lucas sat frozen, his knuckles white. I raised a 4th finger. "Fourth, you will write 2 public apology letters. One to your company where you bragged about your poor mother as if it were a stain. One to the local newspaper to apologize to seniors for belittling them. If you truly want to repair your reputation, start with honesty." Paige swallowed hard, and Lucas squeezed his eyes shut as if taking another blow. But I wasn't done. I held up a 5th finger. "Fifth, for the next year, you will visit me every week. Not a check-the-box visit, real time, dinner together, conversation, listening. You must learn to see me as a real person, not a shameful shadow you avoid." My eyes held both of them. "If you show up stiff and fake, I'll know." I watched. "You grow up, I can tell what's real and what's not." Finally, I opened my hand, letting the 6 fingers fold into the declaration. "Sixth, the most important condition. During that year, if you slip even once, disrespect me, or fall back into your old ways, every bit of my assets will immediately go to the charity. There will be no other chance." The room went dead silent. You could hear cutlery click from a far table. Paige blurted, voice breaking, This is a sentence, not conditions." "No one can endure that." I smiled without a trace of tremor. "Paige, if these 6 conditions are too much, you're free to walk away." But if you truly want to prove yourselves, stay and start from the beginning." Lucas hung his head, then suddenly looked up, eyes red. "Mom, I'll do it. I promise I will. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose everything." I looked at him, my chest tight, but I kept my sternness. "You don't need to promise, Lucas. You just need to do it. A year will prove everything." Attorney David signed, his tone formal. "All conditions have been added to the will's addendum. If they fail, all assets will transfer to the charity according to the law." Whispers rose again, but this time with many approving nods across the room. I sat down and took a sip of water, the coolness easing my throat. Tonight, I hadn't just flipped the board, I'd set my son on a narrow path where he must choose between dignity and loss. Lucas and Paige looked at each other, desperate, but in Lucas's eyes I saw a faint light I hadn't seen in a long time, genuine remorse. And this was only the beginning. In the days after that fateful dinner at the Golden Laurel, something heavy seemed to settle over our lives. No more arrogant texts from Lucas, no more party invites laced with condescension. Instead, I got awkward calls, hesitant voices, and sometimes long, suffocating silences. A week later, the first condition kicked in. Lucas and Paige had to leave the spacious suburban house where every room looked like a page from a design magazine and move into a modest apartment in a working-class complex. I was there the day they moved, not to supervise, but to witness the start of change with my own eyes. A small moving truck pulled up, workers carrying out box after box. The oversized art, the leather armchairs, even Lucas's wine collection all had to stay behind. Paige stood in the doorway clutching a small box, eyes red. She didn't cry, but every strand of hair on her head seemed to protest, leaving comfort. Lucas stayed quiet, face ashen, his hand trembling as he locked the door for the last time. At the new apartment, the contrast was stark. Narrow stairs, peeling paint, the smell of fried onions from the downstairs kitchen drifting up. Inside, the living room barely fit a worn sofa and a small wood table. The window opened to a tiny balcony overlooking a crowded lot full of older cars. Paige stepped in, turned once, and blurted, "Oh God, you call this living?" I stood behind her, calm. "Yes, and you'll live like this for a year. Consider it your first class in humility." Lucas said nothing, just set a box down and sank onto the sofa, head bowed. I didn't blame him. The shock from a luxury home to a modest apartment isn't easy to swallow, especially when your own mother forces you to cross that line. The first day at the restaurant came faster than they expected. I chose Riverbend Grill, not the Golden Laurel, but a mid-tier spot in my group. I deliberately didn't let Lucas start at the most glamorous place, but at a location that was busy, crowded, and sometimes impatient. That morning, I arrived early and watched from a corner table. Lucas wore the uniform, white shirt, black apron, soft shoes for moving fast. He looked stiff, like an actor on stage for the first time. His usually slick hair was messy, tied back, and his hands shook as he carried a water tray. His first guests were an older couple. The wife asked for hot tea, no sugar. Lucas brought a tea bag in a cup but forgot the pot of hot water on the side. She frowned and reminded him. He stammered an apology, turned too quickly, and the tray clacked against a table. Heads turned. I saw his ears turn red, but he didn't run. He came back with the right setup and bowed slightly to apologize again. In that moment, I knew. At least Lucas was trying. Paige wasn't serving tables, but she was assigned to the host stand, greeting guests and managing seating. It's not easy. It takes patience and a gentle voice. On her first day, I watched her behind the podium, forcing a smile. When a large party complained about the wait, Paige flared for a second, then forced herself to keep a soft tone. At the end of the shift, both of them leaned against the wall, dripping with sweat. Lucas muttered, "Mom, I had no idea this job was this hard." I just nodded. Hard, but necessary. This is how you learn to respect the people you used to look down on. On the weekend, it was time for the first condition volunteering at the nursing home. I went along to introduce them to the staff. The road in was shaded by trees, no city glitter, just the smell of dry grass and bird song. When we stepped into the main hall, a group of seniors were playing cards. Others sat in wheelchairs facing the garden. A silver-haired woman with a deeply lined face looked up and smiled kindly. "Two new ones?" Paige's mouth tightened at being called young, but she nodded stiffly. Lucas sat beside an older man and listened to stories from the war years. I sat farther back and watched, and a thin line of hope rose in me. Maybe, just maybe, they would begin to understand the value of simply being there. That night, I went home and sat in my old armchair. Two images played in my head: Lucas fumbling with the water tray, and Paige forcing a smile at guests. It wasn't a benefit victory, just the first steps on a long road, but each step, shaky as it was, still mattered. I knew there would be moments when they faltered, even rebelled. But I also knew the road couldn't be any shorter. If you want to make things right, you start by bowing your head to small things. And today, at least, they bowed. The first weeks passed, and I kept quietly watching. Lucas and Paige seemed to be getting used to the new rhythm, but I knew it was only on the surface. In their eyes and gestures there were flashes of suffocation. Someone who used to sit in a high-rise office was now carrying trays. Someone who used to stroll in with a designer wallet was now greeting guests in a simple uniform. That's not something you change in a few days. One afternoon, I stopped by Riverbend Grill just as Lucas was serving a difficult table. An older man complained that his steak was overcooked and demanded a replacement right away. Lucas clenched his jaw but still bowed his head and said, "Yes, I'll let the kitchen know." I saw his hand gripping the tray so hard his knuckles went white. He was holding back, but the pride inside him hadn't disappeared. Paige was different. At the host stand, she kept trying to smile, but sometimes her impatience slipped through. An elderly guest signed the receipt slowly, and Paige frowned, then quickly covered it. I saw it all. The habit of looking down on others is not easily scrubbed away. Then the fateful day came. It was a weekend, and the restaurant was packed. Lucas was running constant laps, his shirt soaked with sweat. A group of young men in the corner kept teasing him, calling for more water just to make him come back again and again. At first, Lucas swallowed it, but on the fourth time, one of them sneered, "Weren't you some big shot? Now you're just a second-rate waiter." I watched the color drain from Lucas's face. He froze, the tray tilting as water spilled. Then his restraint snapped. He growled, "Don't you have anything better to do than humiliate people?" The room went silent. Nearby guests turned to look. Kitchen staff poked their heads out. I sighed, knowing the first slip had come. The manager rushed out to apologize to the table, then pulled Lucas into the back. I stood and followed. In the cramped break room, Lucas dropped into a chair, head down. The manager's voice was firm. "You can't talk to guests like that. It's a basic rule." Lucas didn't argue, just muttered, "I can't take it anymore, Mom." I tried, but I can't stand being treated like that. I looked at my son, feeling both pity and pain. "Lucas, that's exactly what you have to learn. You treated me no differently than they treated you. Do you understand that feeling now?" He didn't answer, just covered his face with his hands. But the slip didn't stop there. A few days later, I got a call from the nursing home. A supervisor spoke carefully. "Mrs. Nora, yesterday Paige left early. She said it was urgent, but we found out it was just an excuse. Some residents were sad because they waited, and she never came back." My chest tightened. I went straight to their apartment. The door opened to Paige, sitting at the vanity scrolling her phone, and Lucas sprawled on the sofa, no sign of remorse. "Do you two understand what you just did?" I asked, my voice colder than ever. Paige startled, then quickly defended herself. I was just tired. I'll make it up another day. I walked into the living room and looked her in the eye. No, Paige. This isn't about counting sessions. When you leave them, they remember. When you let them down, that disappointment sticks. You just proved that responsibility means nothing to you. Lucas sat up, trying to explain. Mom, we just started. We need time. I cut him off, my voice heavy as lead. You've had a whole lifetime to learn decency. Instead, you chose arrogance. I gave you a year, and in the first, a month, you've already slipped. The room fell into silence. Paige bit her lip. Lucas lowered his head. I knew they were afraid of losing everything, but fear doesn't equal change. The next day, I brought attorney David over. At their small dining table, he spread out the addendum papers. As Mrs. Nora specified, he said, if you violate the conditions, all assets go straight to the charity. Paige panicked. No, please don't. It was just one stumble. I looked at them without softening. One time can be forgiven, but from now on, every repeat will have a price. Son, daughter-in-law, remember this. Every action you take will decide whether you still have a place in the will. I turned to leave before they could plead. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't show them. Being a mother has never been easy. Sometimes to save your child's soul, you have to let them pay for their own missteps. That night, I sat in my quiet home, staring into the dark outside the window. Tree shadows stretched long and lonely across the tile. I remembered when Lucas was little, hugging me and swearing he'd never abandon me. Now that promise had been trampled by his own feet. But deep down, I still hoped. Would this slip be a wake-up call, or just the first step toward collapse? The answer was still unknown, and I knew the cost of that choice wouldn't be cheap. After the bitter slip at the restaurant and the nursing home, I didn't rush to visit Lucas and Paige. Sometimes, silence is the most effective punishment. If I kept showing up, they'd get used to begging and expect me to bend. Instead, I let them sink into their own fear and uncertainty. A month passed. News about the incident at the restaurant spread quickly in my small community, but what I watched closely was how Lucas and Paige handled it. Unlike their old arrogance, they stayed quiet, no excuses, no explanations. I kept tabs through Oscar, the manager, and other staff to see whether they were really changing. Oscar told me that after Lucas lost his temper with the guests, he publicly apologized in front of the entire staff. He admitted he was wrong and promised to relearn his self-control. I knew with his pride, bowing his head in front of many people wasn't easy. That was the first sign. Paige, too. She'd started out just wanting to stand at the host stand, but then she began doing things no one asked. Bussing tables, folding napkins, even helping polish glasses in the kitchen when the rush hit. A young employee told me, Miss Paige even asked me how to handle angry customers. I've never seen her listen to anyone like that before. Those words made me thoughtful. Maybe that stumble really stirred something in them. On the weekend, I went to the nursing home. The seniors there are blunt. They never hide their feelings. I asked about Lucas and Paige. A silver-haired woman, eyes dim but voice clear, told me, "That tall young man, he's been sitting with Mr. Martin, playing chess. He keeps losing, but he listens patiently to the old man's stories. Not many young folks are that patient." Another resident said. The young wife looked stuck up at first, wouldn't lift a finger. But lately she helps me knit and sits while I read poems. I'm surprised. When people want to change, they can. I listened, warmed but cautious. People change quickest when cornered. For it to be real, they needed to keep walking this road step by step, not just out of fear of losing money. One evening, I dropped by their apartment unannounced. I wanted the truth without preparation. The door opened to Paige in simple clothes, hair tied back, face without makeup. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman from before, and I noticed something odd. Her smile felt a little real, not forced. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, stepping aside so I could enter. In the living room, Lucas sat on the floor surrounded by pages full of scribbles. When he saw me, he sprang up, flustered. "Mom, I'm writing the apology letter to my company. I want to do it carefully so they know I mean it." I walked closer and looked over the clumsy but sincere lines. The arrogance was gone, just awkward effort, steady and real. I nodded and said nothing, letting him continue. Dinner was simple. Some pasta, stir-fried vegetables, and roasted chicken. Paige said she learned to cook it from an elderly woman at the nursing home. "I never thought I'd enjoy being in the kitchen," she smiled, but when I saw how happy she was to share her tips, I felt genuinely happy. I listened, a hard-to-name feeling rising in me. Maybe this was the change I'd hoped for, not loud or showy, just small pieces of truth slowly being mended. I asked Lucas, "Do you remember the 5th condition? Visit me weekly not to perform, but to really listen." He nodded, eyes red. "Mom, I know. I've done so much wrong, but this time I want to do it for you, not for the money." I didn't answer right away. I searched his eyes for any sign of a lie. All I saw was sincerity mixed with regret. That night, back home by the window, I sat for a long time. City lights flickered outside. I knew the road ahead was still long, and these changes were still fragile, but at least they had begun clear enough to touch my heart. Lucas and Paige had stumbled hard, but from that, they began to learn how to stand. And for the first time in years, I felt a little faith that maybe, just maybe, they could become better people. Time moved on, and their changes grew clearer. No more clumsy slips, no more random outbursts. Instead, I saw them bow their heads, listen, and stop before letting harsh words fly. But a knot remained in me. Change driven by fear fades fast. Change driven by truth can last. I've lived long enough to know that a polite shell can vanish any time if nothing shifts deep inside. One late fall afternoon, I called them both to my apartment. The sky had already darkened, and a cold wind rattled the window, carrying the smell of dry leaves. They walked in without their old arrogance, replaced by caution. I sat them at my old wooden table where I'd spent years having tea alone. "Months have passed," I began, "and you've done a lot, but today I want us to sit down and face the truth. It's time for a clear evaluation." Lucas nodded, twisting a napkin in his hands. Paige sat still, eyes on the table, but I saw her shoulders tremble. I took out a folder, pages of notes from the nursing home, from the restaurant manager, from staff. I've been tracking things, not to catch mistakes, but to see whether the change is real. And here are the results. I read slowly, each line slicing into the heavy air. Lucas has apologized to guests many times, even when it wasn't entirely his fault. Paige has patiently sat for hours, listening to an elderly woman repeat the same story. Neither of them makes excuses to skip shifts anymore. And they've stopped complaining about their living conditions. I paused and looked up. "These notes show you've come a distance, but the more important question is, why are you changing? Because of the will, or because of who you are?" Silence. The wind whistled clearly outside the porch. Then Lucas took a deep breath. "Mom, at first I did it because I was afraid of losing everything. I admit that. But the longer I stayed in that world, the more ashamed I felt thinking about what I'd done to you. I realized I'd been living like an arrogant taker who never gave. I don't want to be that anymore, whether I inherit or not." His voice shook, but he didn't look away from me. For the first time in years, I saw frankness in his eyes. Paige stayed quiet, then suddenly said, "I used to think you just wanted revenge to force us to kneel. But at the nursing home, I saw the loneliness in the residents' eyes, and I remembered you." Eyes, over the years I realized you were like them, and I'd chosen not to see it. I'm ashamed. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try, even if you cut us out of the will. I looked at the two people in front of me, a son who had hurt me deeply, a daughter-in-law who had mocked me without mercy, and I felt something shift inside. Not instant forgiveness, but at least a door cracked open. I exhaled softly, then said, I'm no saint who can forget everything, but I'm not so small that I'll cling to hatred forever. You've come a long way, and I recognize that. But the door isn't fully open. Today, I'm opening it halfway. Lucas looked up, eyes full of hope. Meaning? I set my pen on the folder. Meaning I'll keep your names in the will, but with conditions. Half of the assets will still go to charity. The other half will only come to you if you maintain this change for at least the next 2 years. If you slip back even once, I won't hesitate to remove your names immediately. Paige bit her lip and nodded quickly. Lucas clenched his hands as if trying to hold on to that fragile chance. I leaned back, my voice lower. I'm not doing this to torment you. I want you to understand that the greatest value isn't money, it's dignity. If you don't keep your dignity, then even with $1 million, you're still empty-handed. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Then Lucas said softly, Mom, thank you. This halfway door, it's our only chance to prove it. I won't lose it again. I didn't answer, just nodded. Inside, I knew I'd made the right choice. Full forgiveness would be too easy. Slamming the door shut would be too harsh. Opening it halfway, this is the only way to grant a chance while keeping the lesson. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the quiet room. The desk lamp cast light across my wrinkles, as clear as the milestones of a life. I knew this journey wasn't over. But, for the first time, I could let my shoulders loosen a little. Maybe, finally, I'd opened a door in my own heart. That winter, the snow fell heavier than usual. I sat in my study, warm lamplight pooling over the wooden desk, folders laid out. Attorney David sat across from me, face serious but eyes expectant. Today I had to sign the final decision, who would inherit and how much. I looked down at the papers. For months, Lucas and Paige had kept their promises. They kept working at the restaurant, no more random outbursts, no more looking down on others. At the nursing home, the residents said they came regularly and even organized small sing-alongs. I couldn't deny it. They had changed, but I also couldn't forget the deep wounds in my heart. No one can erase the fact that, not long ago, my own son humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. Those words won't disappear, not even with 100 apologies. David gently reminded me, Mrs. Nora, we need a clear decision to finalize the paperwork. Do you want to give everything to charity or allocate a portion to them? I leaned back and looked out the window. White snowflakes drifted down, settled on the roof, melted, then froze again into a thin sheet of ice. People are like that, seem rigid, but with enough warmth they can change. At last, I said, divide it into 3, a large portion to charity, that's certain. A portion for Lucas and Paige as a second chance, and the rest I want for a small fund to help older mothers abandoned by their children. I don't want my story to end here. I want it to be a reminder. David nodded and wrote quickly. I signed, my hand a little shaky but my heart steady. The next day, I called Lucas and Paige over. They came in with anxious faces, unsure what to expect. I let them sit and spoke plainly. You've come a long way. I've seen the change, and I value it, but you need to understand that what I leave behind isn't to feed anyone's ambition, it's to carry forward what truly matters. Lucas nodded, voice tight. Mom, we understand. Whatever you decide, we'll accept it. I just hope you'll trust me one more time. I set my hand on the folder and looked at them both. I'll keep you in the will, but most of the assets will go to charity and to those who need them more. You'll receive a portion as a chance to live decently and rebuild your lives. If you value it, use it well. If not, consider the last chance gone. Paige burst into tears, and Lucas lowered his head, hands trembling. I knew they understood this was an ending, and also a beginning. That evening, when I returned to my small house, the snow was still thick. I lit a candle and sat in the quiet living room. I didn't feel heavy anymore. I'd said what needed saying, done what needed doing. The inheritance was no longer a burden, it was a bridge to the future. I knew my story wasn't just mine. So many mothers and fathers out there quietly endure ingratitude and betrayal from their own families. And if my story gives someone the courage to stand up, then everything I've been through has meaning. I looked straight into the camera, recording my final journal entry to share. My voice was slow and low, but warm. Life never runs out of hurt. What matters is how we face it. I chose not to stay silent. I chose to open a halfway door to forgive and to teach. Above all, I chose to keep my own worth. I smiled softly, the candle flickering in the draft. If you've listened this far, tell me what you think. Have you ever faced betrayal from those you love? I hope to read every word you share in the comments, and if you want to keep walking with me, please like, subscribe, and don't miss the stories ahead. Thank you for patiently listening as a woman like me poured out her heart. You've made me feel less alone. I closed the journal and set it beside the candle. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside me, a new spring had begun.